The signal was so old that the translation software almost rejected it as noise. Deep in the archives of the United Human Councils, buried beneath centuries of treaties and trade agreements and war records, there existed a single document that every human leader was required to read before taking office. It was called the Galactic Ledger, and it contained the names of every species that had ever helped humanity during its long climb from Earth to the stars. Most entries were simple. A trading partner who offered fair prices during a famine. A diplomatic ally who spoke for humans at a hostile council meeting. Small kindnesses recorded and remembered. But one entry was different. That IT was handwritten, the ink faded but still readable after 300 years. The words belonged to Captain Adissa Mensa, commander of the colony ship Dawn's Promise, and they told a story that every human child learned in school, but few truly understood. 3 centuries ago, humanity had just discovered faster than light travel. They were children stumbling into a galaxy full of ancient empires and powerful species who viewed them as little more than clever animals. The Dawn's Promise was humanity's first attempt at establishing a colony beyond Earth's solar system. 4,000 souls packed into a vessel held together by hope and primitive engineering. The ship's reactor failed near the Ven cluster, a region of space so remote that no major species bothered to patrol it. The Dawn's Promise drifted, powerless, its passengers slowly starving as their food supplies ran out. Captain Mensa sent distress signals in every direction, but no one answered. The great empires did not care about dying humans. They had their own concerns. Then the Real Lani came. They were not a powerful species. They had no fleet, no empire, no seat on any galactic council. They were farmers and healers who lived on a single world called Delasfor, and they had barely achieved interstellar travel themselves. Their ship was small, meant for short trading runs to nearby systems. But they heard the distress signal, and they came. The Real Lani vessel carried only enough food for its own crew of 12. When they found the Dawn's Promise and saw 4,000 starving humans inside, they did not hesitate. They gave everything, every ration, every seed meant for planting, every preserved meal they had saved for emergencies. The Real Lani crew went hungry so that human children could eat. Captain Mensa begged them to keep something for themselves. The Real Lani elder who led the rescue, a woman whose name was recorded as Grandmother Tessa, simply smiled and said words that would echo through human history. We have a home to return to. You have nothing. Take what we have. Survive. That is enough. But the Real Lani did not stop there. Their engineers, trained only in basic repairs, worked alongside human crews for 3 weeks to patch the Dawn's Promise enough to move again. They guided the crippled ship to a habitable moon where humans could land and rebuild. They stayed until they were certain the colony would survive. Then they left, asking for nothing in return. Captain Mensa recorded everything. She wrote the ledger entry herself, her hand shaking with emotion as she described what the Real Lani had done. The final lines of her entry became the most famous words in human diplomatic history. The Real Lani gave us life when we had nothing. They shared their last meal with strangers. This debt can never be repaid in full, but humanity will try. We will remember. We will always remember. And when the Real Lani need us, we will come. The colony on that moon survived. It grew. It became the foundation for humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Within a century, humans had spread across dozens of worlds. Within 2 centuries, they had become a major power, respected and sometimes feared by the ancient empires. But the Real Lani remained small. They stayed on Delos 4, content with their farms and their healing traditions. They never asked humanity for anything. They never called in the debt. Most of them forgot that the debt even existed. Grandmother Tessa passed away, and her children grew old, and their children had children of their own. The story of the strange, soft-skinned beings they had once saved became a legend, then a myth, then almost nothing at all. The galaxy forgot about the Real Lani. They were too weak to matter, too peaceful to threaten anyone, too quiet to attract attention. But humanity did not forget. The Galactic Ledger was updated every year. New entries were added. Old debts were marked as paid. But the Real Lani entry remained open, highlighted in red, a reminder that the greatest debt humanity had ever owed was still outstanding. Every human ambassador knew about it. Every military commander studied it. Every child learned the story of Grandmother Tessa and the 12 Real Lani who gave everything to save 4,000 strangers. And somewhere in the archives, next to Captain Mintz's original entry, there was a note added by the first president of the United Human Councils. It was short and simple. When they call, we answer. No matter the cost, no matter the enemy. We answer. For 300 years, the Real Lani never called. Then, on a quiet morning at a human listening post on the edge of colonized space, a weak signal came through the static. It was broken, desperate, barely coherent, but the translator recognized the language. Real Lani, and the ledger was about to be opened. The listening post was nothing special. A small station staffed by 6 technicians, floating in the dark between star systems, recording signals that more important people would analyze later. Most days, nothing interesting happened. Most days, the crew played cards and complained about the food and counted the weeks until their rotation ended. Communications Officer Bram was halfway through his 3rd cup of synthetic coffee when his console beeped. He almost ignored it. Signals came through all the time, usually garbage data from dying satellites or echoes from distant civilizations that had stopped transmitting centuries ago. But something about this one made him pause. The signal was weak, barely strong enough to register. It was also old, using a transmission format that humans had abandoned generations ago. Whoever sent it did not have modern equipment. Whoever sent it was desperate enough to use whatever they had. Bram ran it through the translator. The first attempt failed. The second attempt produced fragments. The third attempt made his blood run cold. Please, anyone, we are dying. The Sindari have come. Our world burns. We are the Real Lani of Delos 4. If anyone remembers us, please, the message repeated. Over and over. A loop of fear and hopelessness sent into the void by someone who expected nothing but wanted to try anyway. Bram knew the name Real Lani. Every human knew it, but he needed to be certain. He accessed the Galactic Ledger, the database that every human vessel carried copies of, and searched for the entry. There it was. Captain Mintz's handwriting. Grandmother Tessa's sacrifice. The debt that had never been paid. Bram's hands were shaking as he flagged the signal as highest priority. He attached the ledger entry. He added a single note of his own. They are calling. We need to answer. The message traveled up the chain faster than anything Bram had ever seen. Within an hour, it reached Admiral Yara Okonkwo, commander of the 7th Fleet. Within 3 hours, it reached the United Human Councils. Within 6 hours, every human government in the galaxy had received copies of the distress signal and the ledger entry that explained why it mattered on Delos 4. The situation was worse than the signal suggested. The Sindari Dominion had arrived 3 weeks earlier. They were harvesters, a species that had built their empire by conquering weaker civilizations and stripping them of everything useful. Resources, technology, people. The Sindari did not negotiate. They did not offer terms. They simply took. The Real Lani had nothing to offer. No valuable minerals, no advanced technology, no military strength. But they had bodies, and the Sindari always needed workers for their mining colonies and factory worlds. Workers who would be used until they broke and then discarded. Sindari warships circled Delos 4 like predators waiting to feed. Their ground forces had already landed, rounding up Real Lani by the thousands and loading them onto transport vessels. The Real Lani had no weapons. They had no army. They had only their traditions of healing and farming, skills that meant nothing against plasma rifles and orbital bombardment. Elder Sala was 112 years old. She had heard the stories of the soft-skinned strangers her grandmother had saved, but she had never believed them. They were fairy tales, legends told to children to teach them about kindness. No one came to help the weak. That was not how the galaxy worked. But as she watched her people being dragged away in chains, she decided to try anyway. She found an ancient transmitter in the ruins of a trading post, a device so old that it still used formats from the early days of interstellar communication. She did not know if anyone would hear. She did not know if anyone would care. She recorded her message. She sent it into the darkness. Then she sat down and waited to die. Far away, in the halls of the United Human Councils, the debate was surprisingly short. The Sindari Dominion has 40 capital ships and over 200 support vessels, said one council member. They have never lost a war. They have conquered dozens of species. If we intervene, we risk everything. Admiral Okonkwo stood and looked at the assembled leaders. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes, but when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 300 years of human history. The ledger has been opened, she said. The Real Lani gave our ancestors their last meal. They saved 4,000 lives when they had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Captain Mincer wrote that we would answer when they called. She did not write that we would answer if it was convenient. She did not write that we would answer if the enemy was weak. She wrote that we would answer. The council was silent. I am taking the 7th Fleet to Delos 4, Okonkwo continued. The 9th Fleet has already volunteered to follow. The 14th is mobilizing as we speak. This is not a rescue mission. This is humanity telling the galaxy who we are. We remember our debts, and we pay them in full. She turned and walked toward the door. Any species watching should take note. Help humanity once, and we will move heaven and earth to help you back. Hurt us once, and we will never stop coming. The Sindari chose to threaten beings under our protection. They're about to learn what that means. The door closed behind her. 3 days later, the largest human fleet ever assembled began moving toward Delos 4. And on that dying world, Elder Sala looked up at the burning sky and wondered if miracles were real. News traveled fast in the galaxy. It had to. Empires rose and fell based on information, and every major species maintained networks of spies and informants who watched the movements of potential enemies when the human fleets began to mobilize, everyone noticed. The Sindari High Command received their first reports within hours. 3 human battle groups were moving through neutral space at maximum speed, heading directly toward Delos 4. The largest deployment humanity had ever assembled outside of a declared war. High Commander Dreth read the reports with amusement. He was an old warrior, scarred by 100 campaigns, and he had conquered species far more dangerous than humans. He knew humanity's reputation. Traitors, diplomats, soft creatures who preferred talking to fighting. They had military strength, yes, but they rarely used it. They were famous for compromise and negotiation. They are bluffing, Dreth announced to his officers. The humans have no stake in Delos 4. They gain nothing by defending it. This is posturing, nothing more. They will send harsh words and demand negotiations, and we will ignore them until they go away. His second-in-command, a younger officer named Voss, was less certain. High Commander, the humans have never mobilized this many ships for a bluff. Their fleet outnumbers ours. Perhaps we should consider what? Retreat? Because the humans are throwing a tantrum over some farmers. Dreth laughed. The Real Lani are nobody. They have no value. The humans will not sacrifice their soldiers for a species that cannot even fight back. Send them a warning. Tell them to withdraw or face annihilation. They will comply. The message was transmitted across all human frequencies. It was direct and brutal, as Sindari communications always were. Human vessels, you are entering Sindari space. The world you approach belongs to the Dominion. Any attempt to interfere with Dominion operations will be considered an act of war. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. This is your only warning. Admiral Okonkwo received the message aboard her flagship, the Remembrance. She read it once, then handed the tablet to her communications officer. Reply in Sindari. 2 words. Come try. The officer hesitated. Admiral, are you certain? This will escalate. Send it. The message went out, and across the galaxy, species who had been watching from the shadows leaned closer to their screens. Something was happening. Something unprecedented. The humans were not backing down. On Delos 4. The Real Lani continued to suffer. Sindari soldiers moved through cities and villages, separating families, marking the strong for labor camps and the weak for disposal. They were efficient and cruel, viewing the Real Lani not as people, but as resources to be harvested. Elder Sala had been captured with a group of children she was trying to hide in the ruins of a temple. The Sindari commander who found them laughed at her attempts to protect them. "Old woman, no one is coming to save you," he said. "Your species is alone. You have no allies, no friends, no one who cares whether you live or die. Accept this truth and your end will be easier." Sala looked at him with eyes that had seen a century of life. "My grandmother once saved strangers who had nothing. She gave them her last meal. She asked for nothing in return. That is who the Real Lani are. We do not abandon hope." The commander raised his weapon. "Hope is for the weak." He never fired. His communicator screamed with emergency alerts, and his face went pale as he listened to the reports coming from orbit. "Impossible," he whispered. "That's impossible." Human ships were dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Not the small patrol vessels the Sindari had expected. Not the diplomatic cruisers that usually carried human negotiators. Warships. Heavy cruisers with weapon systems designed for one purpose only. Carriers launching fighters in waves so thick they looked like swarms of angry insects. And they were still coming. More ships every minute. The 7th Fleet, the 9th Fleet, the 14th Fleet. Humanity had not sent a rescue party. Humanity had sent an armada. High Commander Dreth watched the sensor readings with growing disbelief. The humans had deployed more firepower than the Sindari had ever seen gathered in one place. Their formation was aggressive, weapons hot, shields at maximum. This was not a negotiating position. This was a battle formation. "Hail them," Dreth ordered. "Demand an explanation." "They cannot." The communication officer interrupted him. "High Commander, we are receiving a transmission on all frequencies. The humans are broadcasting to the entire system." The message filled every screen, every speaker, every communication device in the Delos system. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared, calm and cold. "Sindari forces, this is Admiral Yara Okonkwo of the United Human Fleets. 300 years ago, the Real Lani saved 4,000 human lives when we had nothing. They gave us their last meal. They asked for nothing in return. We told them we would remember. We told them we would answer when they called. They have called. We are answering." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You have committed acts of war against beings under human protection. You have enslaved innocents. You have burned cities. Every crime you committed against the Real Lani, you committed against humanity. And humanity does not forgive. Humanity does not forget. Release your prisoners. Withdraw your forces. Or face the consequences." Dreth stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. "They are insane. They would destroy their fleet for farmers? For a debt 3 centuries old? This is madness." But deep in his chest, something cold was beginning to form. Something that felt very much like fear, because the humans were not stopping. They were accelerating, and their weapons were powering up. The Sindari had conquered 63 species across 4 centuries. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed empires, and broken the will of civilizations far older than humanity. Their military doctrine was built on a simple truth. The weak submitted, and the strong survived. No one fought for the weak. It was not profitable. It was not logical. It was not done. High Commander Dreth assembled his fleet into attack formation. 40 capital ships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack planets. 200 support vessels carrying fighters, bombers, and boarding parties trained for close-quarters combat. The Sindari Armada was a machine designed for one purpose: crushing anyone foolish enough to stand against the Dominion. "The humans outnumber us," Voss said quietly, reviewing the sensor data. "Their fleet composition suggests they came prepared for a prolonged engagement. This is not a show of force, High Commander. They mean to fight." Dreth dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. "Numbers mean nothing without the will to use them. The humans are traitors at heart. They understand cost and benefit. When they see our weapons fire, when they count their dead, they will negotiate. They always negotiate." He gave the order to advance, across the void, Admiral Okonkwo watched the Sindari fleet move toward her position. Her officers were tense, their hands hovering over weapon controls, their eyes fixed on targeting displays. Many of them had never seen combat on this scale. Many of them would not survive the day. Okonkwo knew this. She had read the casualty projections. She had approved the battle plan, knowing what it would cost. And she had done it anyway, because some things were more important than survival. Admiral, her tactical officer, said, "The Sindari are entering optimal firing range. They appear to be preparing a coordinated strike against our forward elements. Should we open fire?" "Not yet." Okonkwo's voice was calm. "Let them come closer. Let them commit." The Sindari fleet pushed forward, confident in their superiority. They had fought humans before, small skirmishes on the edges of human space, and the humans had always backed down, always sought compromise, always chosen the sensible option. This time was different. The human fleet did not stop, did not slow, did not attempt to establish communication for negotiation. They simply accelerated, their weapons charging to full power, their shields flaring with energy that painted the void in shades of blue and gold. Dreth felt the first flicker of genuine uncertainty. What are they doing? They should be calling for terms by now. They should be the first human missiles launched, not a warning shot, not a ranging attack. A full volley, thousands of warheads streaking across the darkness toward the Sindari line. The targeting was precise, coordinated, devastating. Sindari point defense systems screamed as they tried to intercept the incoming fire. They stopped most of them, but not all. The Sindari cruiser dominance took 3 direct hits and exploded in a bloom of fire and debris. The cruiser Conquest lost its engine section and began to spiral helplessly. Across the Sindari line, ships that had never known defeat were suddenly fighting for their lives. "Return fire!" Dreth roared. "Destroy them!" The battle became chaos. Sindari weapons tore into human formations, and human ships died. Carriers split apart under concentrated fire. Cruisers buckled and burned. Fighters vanished in flashes of light, so brief they barely registered on sensors. The casualties were exactly as terrible as Okonkwo had predicted. But the humans did not stop at a human destroyer. Its engines crippled and its hull breached, accelerated directly toward a Sindari battleship. The Sindari crew tried to evade, tried to destroy the approaching vessel, but they were too slow. The destroyer rammed into the battleship's midsection, detonating its reactor in a suicide attack that killed both ships instantly. It was not an isolated incident. Across the battle line, human crews made the same choice. Damaged ships that should have retreated instead pressed forward, using their dying vessels as weapons, trading their lives for Sindari kills. Dreth watched in horror as 3 more of his capital ships fell to similar attacks. This is madness. What kind of species fights like this? What kind of beings throw their lives away for farmers? The answer came over the communication system, broadcast by a human pilot whose fighter was spiraling toward a Sindari carrier. "The Real Lani gave our ancestors their last meal. We owe them everything." The fighter hit the carrier's bridge. Both ceased to exist. Voss stared at the tactical display, his scales pale with shock. "High Commander, we have lost 12 capital ships. Our support fleet has taken 50% casualties. The humans are not stopping. They're not slowing. They keep coming. I can see that." Dreth slammed his fist against his command console. "Order all ships to focus fire on their flagship. Kill their admiral, and the rest will fall apart." But when the concentrated Sindari assault hit the Remembrance, the human flagship simply absorbed the punishment. Its shields held. Its crew fought on. And Admiral Okonkwo's voice echoed across the battlefield once more. "Sindari forces, you have killed many of us today. You will kill many more before this is over. But we will not leave until every Real Lani prisoner is free. We will not stop until your fleet is broken. This is what humanity does for those who showed us kindness. Imagine what we do to those who show us cruelty." Dreth looked at the bodies of his officers, killed by a missile that had breached the hull. He looked at the burning wreckage of ships that had served the Dominion for centuries. He looked at the human fleet, still advancing, still firing, still coming despite losses that would have broken any other species. And for the first time in his long career of conquest, High Commander Dreth felt true fear. The Battle of Delos 4 lasted 11 hours. Historians would later argue about whether it should be called a battle at all. Some preferred the term execution. Others used the word reckoning. By the third hour, the Sindari had lost half their capital ships. The humans had paid dearly, leaving the void littered with the wreckage of cruisers and destroyers and thousands of fighters. But they had not retreated. They had not even paused. Every time a human ship fell, two more took its place, crews who had watched their friends die and who were now fighting with cold, focused rage. High Commander Dreth attempted to break the human formation by ascending his elite boarding parties to capture enemy vessels. It was a tactic that had worked against dozens of species, using the Sindari's natural strength and ferocity in close combat to turn enemy ships into tombs. It did not work against humans. The first boarding party breached a human frigate and found the crew waiting for them with weapons drawn and hatred in their eyes. The Sindari warriors were larger, stronger, trained from birth for combat. The humans were smaller, weaker, and they did not care. They fought like demons, using every weapon available, every piece of debris, every advantage their ships' cramped corridors provided. When their weapons ran dry, they fought with knives. When their knives broke, they fought with their hands. The boarding party was annihilated to the last soldier. The human frigate's crew took 90% casualties, but the survivors sealed the breaches and returned to the battle. This pattern repeated across the engagement. Sindari boarding attempts met human defenders who refused to surrender, refused to flee, refused to die quietly. The cost was horrific on both sides, but the humans endured it in a way the Sindari had never encountered. Why did they not break? Voss whispered, watching another human destroyer make a suicidal run at a Sindari carrier. We have killed so many of them. Why do they keep fighting? Dreth had no answer. He had conquered species that valued honor and species that valued survival and species that valued profit. None of them had fought like this. None of them had been willing to sacrifice so much for so little apparent gain. By the 6th hour, the Sindari fleet was in full retreat. But there was nowhere to retreat to. Human ships had circled behind them during the fighting, cutting off their escape routes, hurting them like prey. The hunters had become the hunted. Dreth opened a communication channel. Human Commander, I demand to speak with your admiral. We can negotiate terms. We can reach an agreement. This slaughter serves no purpose. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared on a screen. She looked tired. Her uniform was singed from a fire that had swept through her bridge hours earlier. But her eyes were steady, and her voice was ice. You want to negotiate? After what you did to the Real Lani, after you burned their cities and enslaved their children, it was business. They were weak. The galaxy belongs to the strong. Then prove your strength. Okonkwo leaned forward. Stop running. Turn your fleet around. Face us. Dreth felt something twist in his chest. Fear, shame, rage, all of it mixing together into a poison that clouded his thoughts. You are insane. You have thrown away your fleet for farmers. For a debt centuries old, you have gained nothing. We have gained something you will never understand. Okonkwo's voice softened, but not with mercy. With certainty, the Real Lani will know that we came. Every species watching this battle will know that we came. 300 years from now, when someone saves a human life, they will know that the favor will be returned. That is worth more than ships. That is worth more than lives. That is who we are. She cut the communication. By the 8th hour, the Sindari flagship was surrounded. Dreth stood on a bridge filled with smoke and corpses, watching human ships close in from every direction. His fleet was gone. 40 capital ships reduced to debris and expanding gas clouds. 200 support vessels scattered or destroyed. The greatest military force the Dominion had ever assembled, broken in less than a day. He thought about fighting to the end, about taking as many humans with him as possible. But looking at the faces of his surviving crew, he saw something he had never seen before in Sindari eyes. Defeat. True, complete, spiritual defeat. The humans did not demand surrender. They simply waited, weapons aimed, shields steady. Patient. Implacable. Dreth gave the order to stand down. On Delos 4. The Real Lani watched the burning stars in their sky and wept. They did not know what was happening above them. They only knew that for hours, the Sindari soldiers had stopped taking prisoners. They had stopped moving entirely. They stood frozen, listening to reports from orbit, their faces showing expressions the Real Lani had never seen before. Fear. Then the first human dropships appeared through the clouds. Not weapons platforms. Not war machines. Transport vessels, painted with symbols the Real Lani did not recognize, descending toward their wounded world. Elder Sala stood among the children she had been trying to protect and watched the ships land. She expected soldiers, conquerors, new masters to replace the old. Instead, humans emerged carrying medical supplies and food and building materials. They moved through the Real Lani with gentle efficiency, treating wounds, distributing rations, searching for survivors in the rubble. One of them, a young woman with dark skin and kind eyes, knelt beside Sala and offered her water. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Sala could barely speak. Why? Why did you come?" The woman smiled. "Because your grandmother saved our people 300 years ago. We told her we would remember. We meant it." And for the first time since the Sindari had arrived, Sala allowed herself to cry. The rebuilding of Delos 4 took years. Human engineers worked alongside Real Lani farmers to restore what the Sindari had destroyed. New buildings rose from the ashes of the old. Fields were replanted. Hospitals were established. Schools reopened for children who had spent weeks expecting to die in labor camps. Admiral Okonkwo remained on the surface until she was certain the Real Lani no longer needed military protection. She walked through the recovering cities, speaking with survivors, listening to their stories, documenting the crimes the Sindari had committed. Every death, every act of cruelty, every family torn apart. These records would be submitted to the Galactic Assembly, the closest thing the galaxy had to a governing body. The Sindari Dominion would answer for what they had done, not through war, but through the slow, grinding machinery of interstellar law. Their trade routes would be blocked. Their allies would abandon them. Their empire, built on the suffering of the weak, would crumble from within. But that was a matter for diplomats and politicians. Okonkwo had a more personal task to complete. Elder Sala was found in the ruins of her family's temple, overseeing the restoration of ancient healing texts that the Sindari had tried to burn. She was frail, exhausted, and she had aged visibly in the weeks since the invasion began. But her eyes still held the quiet strength that had sustained her people through generations of obscurity. Okonkwo approached her with a data pad in her hands. Sala recognized the device, though she did not understand what it displayed. "What is this?" "The Galactic Ledger." Okonkwo knelt before the elder, a gesture of respect that surprised everyone watching. Every human government maintains a copy. It records every debt we owe, every kindness we have received. This entry was written 300 years ago by Captain Adissa Minsa, commander of the colony ship your grandmother saved. She handed the pad to Sala. The elder looked at the faded handwriting, the words preserved across centuries, and her hands began to tremble. "The Real Lani gave us life when we had nothing. They share their last meal with strangers. This debt can never be repaid in full, but humanity will try. We will remember. We will always remember. And when the Real Lani need us, we will come." Sala read the words again. Then again. Tears fell on the screen. "My grandmother never told us what she did. She said it was nothing special. She said anyone would have done the same." Okonkwo shook her head. "No, anyone would not have done the same. The galaxy is full of species who would have ignored that distress signal, who would have calculated the risk and decided it was not worth the cost. Your grandmother did something extraordinary. She showed compassion when she had every reason to look away. And because of that, 4,000 humans lived to build families and cities and an entire civilization. Everything we are, we owe to her." She reached into her uniform and produced a small medallion, gold and silver intertwined, bearing the symbol of the United Human Councils. This is awarded to individuals and species who have shown exceptional service to humanity. It has been given to generals and diplomats, scientists and artists. But it was first created for your grandmother, though she died before we could present it to her. It belongs to you now. To all the Real Lani. Sala took the medallion with shaking hands. We did not expect payment. We did not expect anything. We know. That is why we came. Okonkwo stood and looked out at the recovering city. The Sindari believed that the galaxy belongs to the strong. They were wrong. The galaxy belongs to those who are remembered. Your people will never be forgotten again. We will make sure of it. Word of the Battle of Delos, 4 spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species who had lived in fear of the Sindari watched the recordings of human ships sacrificing themselves for farmers they had never met. They saw the casualties humanity had accepted, the losses they had endured, all for a debt 3 centuries old. The Sindari Dominion collapsed within a decade. Their subject species, emboldened by what they had witnessed, began to resist. Worlds that had been conquered rebelled. Allies who had supported the Dominion out of fear switched sides. The empire that had harvested the weak for 400 years found itself alone, surrounded by enemies who no longer feared its might. But the ripples spread far beyond the fall of one empire. Treaties were rewritten across the galaxy. Species that had ignored humanity as mere traitors began to court their favor. Others, who had considered humanity weak and soft, quietly updated their military assessments. The humans were not conquerors. They were not empire builders. But they were something perhaps more dangerous. They were loyal. Help a human once, and they would move heaven and earth to help you back. Hurt a human once, and they would hunt you across the stars. On Delos 4. A monument was erected in the central plaza of the capital city. It showed 2 figures, a Real Lani elder offering a bowl of food to a kneeling human. Beneath it, a plaque carried words in both Real Lani and human languages. To Grandmother Tessa and the crew of the Gentle Wind, who gave their last meal to strangers. Your kindness echoes through eternity. And below that, in letters large enough to be seen from orbit, a single human phrase that would become famous across the galaxy. We remember, in the years that followed, species great and small learned the truth about humanity. They were patient. They were stubborn. They kept records of every kindness and every cruelty, and they never, ever forgot. The galaxy was full of empires built on power and fear. But humanity built something different. Something based on memory and gratitude and the unshakable belief that debts, once incurred, must be paid. And paid they were. Always. Without exception. With unstoppable fury when necessary. But also with unstoppable love.